Oak Ridge Estates wasn't just another suburban neighborhood, it was a carefully curated community where every blade of grass, every mailbox, and every parking space was scrutinized with near-obsessive precision. Michael Thompson had lived here for 7 years, and in that time he had become the epitome of the perfect resident. A 42-year-old software engineer who worked remotely, Michael took pride in maintaining not just his impeccable townhouse, but also in being a considerate neighbor. His 2018 Toyota Camry, a silver-gray sedan that he kept as polished as his professional reputation, was always parked with mathematical precision. Each morning, Michael would spend an extra minute ensuring the vehicle was perfectly aligned within the designated parking space. Front wheels exactly parallel to the white lines, positioned centrally with equal distance on either side. This wasn't mere fastidiousness, it was a reflection of his personality, methodical, respectful, and always mindful of community rules. The Oak Ridge Estates parking area was notoriously challenging. Designed in the early 2000s when compact cars were the norm, the spaces had become increasingly tight as residents favored larger SUVs and trucks. Most residents understood the delicate dance of parking, making careful, calculated maneuvers. Most, but not all. Rebecca Hartwell was the exception, a 55-year-old real estate agent who had been on the HOA board for over a decade and seemed to believe her position granted her immunity from the very rules she enforced. Her pearl-white Cadillac Escalade was a monument to her perceived status, a vehicle far too large for the compact parking spaces, but which she navigated with an unearned sense of entitlement. That crisp Saturday morning in early October began like any other. A light fog hung over the neighborhood, muting the typically vibrant fall colors. Michael had just finished his morning coffee, glancing out the window to ensure his car was perfectly positioned before settling into his home office for a day of work. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant sound of a leaf blower and the occasional chirping of sparrows. Rebecca's arrival disrupted the morning's tranquility. Her Escalade came barreling into the parking area with the subtlety of a charging rhinoceros. Michael watched, initially curious, then increasingly concerned as she attempted to maneuver into a space clearly too narrow for her oversized vehicle. Her first attempt resulted in a sharp turn that brought her dangerously close to the parked vehicles. Most drivers would have recognized the impossibility of the situation and found an alternative parking spot. Not Rebecca. With a determination that bordered on recklessness, she continued her attempts, each movement more aggressive than the last. Michael felt a growing sense of dread, his hands gripping his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles turned white. And then it happened. With a sickening crunch of metal against metal, Rebecca's Escalade sideswiped Michael's meticulously maintained Camry. The sound reverberated through the quiet morning like a gunshot, shattering the neighborhood's peaceful atmosphere. Paint scraped, metal bent, and the carefully maintained vehicle Michael had kept in pristine condition for years was now marred by a massive, jagged streak of damage. In that moment, Michael knew this was about to become more than just a simple parking mishap. This was the beginning of a battle that would test his patience, his principles, and his resolve. The moment hung suspended in that peculiar silence that follows a sudden destructive impact. Michael stood frozen by his window, watching as Rebecca Hartwell emerged from her massive Escalade. Her movements were a study in calculated indignation, the kind of performative outrage perfected by someone accustomed to never being questioned. Rebecca wore her standard Saturday morning outfit, designer workout leggings, an expensive North Face jacket, and oversized Gucci sunglasses that seemed more appropriate for a Hollywood premiere than a suburban parking lot. Her blonde hair, meticulously highlighted and styled, remained impeccable, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just created. As Michael stepped outside, he could see the full extent of the damage. His once pristine Camry now bore a massive jagged scar along its driver's side, silver paint scraped away, revealing the raw metal underneath. The impact had not just scratched the car, but had visibly dented the panel, a testament to the force of Rebecca's careless maneuver. "Can you believe this?" Rebecca's voice cut through the morning air, her tone dripping with accusation before Michael could even speak. "Your car was practically in the middle of the parking space. This is clearly your fault." Michael took a deep breath, a deliberate attempt to maintain his composure. He had dealt with HOA board members like Rebecca before, individuals who wielded their minor authority like a weapon, believing themselves above reproach. "I'm sorry," he said carefully, "but my car was perfectly positioned within the parking lines. I have security camera footage that will confirm this." Rebecca's eyes narrowed behind her designer sunglasses. The dismissive laugh that followed was calculated to minimize and belittle. "Security camera, please. I've been on this HOA board for 12 years. Who do you think they'll believe, me or you?" The implied threat was clear. Rebecca wasn't just a random resident, she was a powerful member of the HOA board, someone who had cultivated relationships and built a network of influence within the community. Her real estate connections and long-standing position meant she was used to getting her way. Michael noticed several neighbors had begun to emerge from their townhouses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Peterson, from 2 units down, an elderly woman who missed nothing, was peering out her window. The Rodriguez family's teenagers were standing on their front steps, smartphone cameras subtly pointed in their direction. "I suggest we exchange insurance information," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. "The damage to my vehicle is significant." Rebecca's demeanor shifted. From accusatory, she moved to a performative victimhood. "I can't believe you're trying to make this my fault. You know how tight these parking spaces are. Anyone could have made this mistake." But they both knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a combination of recklessness and entitlement, a deliberate attempt to blame the victim rather than accept responsibility. As they stood there, the tension crackling between them like static electricity, Michael realized this was about more than just a car accident. This was a moment that would define their relationship, their community interactions, and potentially expose the toxic dynamics of power within the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. He pulled out his phone, began taking photographs of the damage, and started recording their conversation. Rebecca's confident swagger momentarily faltered. For the first time that morning, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. The battle lines had been drawn, and Michael Thompson was prepared to fight. The next few days became a bureaucratic battlefield that tested Michael's patience and professional problem-solving skills. His first step was to meticulously document everything. Using his high-resolution smartphone camera, he captured dozens of photographs from multiple angles, ensuring every scratch, dent, and paint transfer was recorded with surgical precision. He even used a measuring tape to document the exact dimensions of the damage, creating a comprehensive visual and dimensional record. Michael's background in software engineering served him well. He created a digital folder with timestamp-verified images, downloaded the security camera footage, and compiled witness statements from 2 neighbors who had observed the entire incident. Mr. Rodriguez, a retired civil engineer, had actually been outside washing his car and provided a detailed written account of Rebecca's reckless parking maneuver. When Michael first contacted Rebecca's insurance company, the representative seemed initially neutral. However, he quickly discovered that Rebecca had already filed a report, a preemptive strike that painted him as the responsible party. Her narrative was carefully crafted. She claimed Michael's car was improperly parked, positioned in a way that made navigation impossible, and suggested he was at fault for the collision. The insurance adjuster, Sarah Bennett, was a seasoned professional who had heard every possible version of parking dispute stories. Michael's approach was different from most claimants. Instead of becoming emotional, he methodically presented his evidence. He uploaded the security camera footage, included the written witness statements, and provided a detailed breakdown of the incident. "Ms. Hartwell's report suggests I was improperly parked," Michael explained during a recorded phone call. "I have photographic evidence showing my vehicle was precisely positioned within the designated parking space, with equal distance on both sides of the line." What Rebecca hadn't anticipated was Michael's level of documentation. The security camera footage was particularly damning. It showed his Camry perfectly aligned, with Rebecca's Escalade making a series of increasingly aggressive maneuvers that ultimately resulted in the collision. The video timestamp and high-definition clarity left no room for interpretation. Rebecca's insurance company began to realize they were dealing with more than a typical dispute. Michael had transformed what could have been a he-said-she-said situation into a forensically documented case. He requested a formal investigation, citing the video evidence and witness statements. Meanwhile, Rebecca wasn't idle. She began leveraging her HOA connections, making phone calls to board members, and attempting to create a narrative of Michael as a troublemaker. Rumors started circulating, subtle insinuations about Michael being difficult and always causing problems in the neighborhood. But Michael was several steps ahead. He started documenting these attempts at character assassination, recognizing them as potential grounds for additional legal action. Each phone call, each whispered comment became another piece of evidence in what was rapidly becoming a complex legal puzzle. The insurance investigation dragged on for weeks. Rebecca's initial confidence began to waver. Her attempts to manipulate the narrative were systematically dismantled by Michael's meticulous documentation. What she had assumed would be a quick resolution was turning into a protracted battle. Most residents would have backed down. Most would have accepted a compromise or allowed themselves to be intimidated by Rebecca's HOA connections. But Michael Thompson was not most residents. Each roadblock only strengthened his resolve. As the investigation continued, it became clear that this was no longer just about a car accident. This was about accountability, truth, and standing up to a system that often favored those with power and connections. The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association meeting was always a performance of small-town politics, but this month's gathering promised to be especially explosive. Michael arrived precisely at 7 p.m., a meticulously prepared folder tucked under his arm, his software engineer's mind having transformed the car incident into a forensically documented case study. The community center's meeting room buzzed with the typical pre-meeting chatter. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, and the smell of cheap coffee permeated the air. Rebecca Hartwell sat at the front table, her posture rigid, surrounded by her longtime allies on the board. She had clearly been working the room, whispering to board members and longtime residents, attempting to paint Michael as a troublemaker. As the meeting was called to order, Rebecca seized an early opportunity. During the open discussion period, she launched into a carefully crafted narrative. "We have a serious parking issue in our community," she began, her voice deliberately measured. "Some residents seem to think they can park however they want, creating hazards for everyone." The thinly veiled accusation was clear. She was talking about Michael. Michael had anticipated this. He had spent weeks preparing, collecting not just evidence about the car incident, but also a comprehensive review of the community's parking bylaws. When he was called to speak, he approached the podium with a calm demeanor that seemed to unsettle Rebecca. "I'd like to address the parking concerns," Michael began, his voice clear and professional. "I've conducted a comprehensive review of our community parking guidelines. According to Section 4.2 of our HOA bylaws, parking spaces are defined as 8 feet 6 inches wide. My vehicle was precisely positioned within those guidelines on the day of the incident." He then did something unexpected. Michael projected a series of images, security camera footage, precise measurements, diagrams showing his car's exact positioning. The room fell silent. Board members who had been nodding along with Rebecca's narrative now looked uncomfortable. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She sent a formal letter to Michael, a document dripping with bureaucratic language, suggesting multiple violations. The letter claimed his parking method was a chronic issue, that he had repeatedly violated community guidelines. It was a transparent attempt to create a paper trail that might support her version of events. Michael's response was surgical. He drafted a meticulously worded counter letter, citing exact bylaws, attaching photographic evidence, and requesting a formal investigation into the incident. He copied the letter to every board member, ensuring transparency. The HOA board found itself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. Rebecca had always been a powerful figure, someone who could make or break residents' experiences in the community. But Michael had transformed the narrative. He wasn't just defending himself, he was exposing the potential abuse of power within the HOA. Behind the scenes, Michael began reaching out to other longtime residents. He discovered he wasn't the first person to have a conflict with Rebecca. Quietly, systematically, he gathered stories of subtle intimidation, of arbitrary enforcement of rules, of a culture of fear that Rebecca had cultivated over years. What had begun as a simple car accident was rapidly becoming something much larger. It was no longer just about a dent and a scratch. It was about accountability, about challenging a system that had long protected those in power. As the weeks progressed, the tension in Oak Ridge Estates became palpable. Neighbors who had long been silent began to whisper. Something was changing, and Rebecca Hartwell, for the first time in years, looked worried. The law office of Jameson and Klein occupied a modest brick building on the edge of downtown, a place where precision mattered more than pretense. Michael sat across from Elena Rodriguez, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for methodical case preparation and an uncanny ability to dismantle complex legal challenges. "This isn't just about a car accident anymore," Elena observed, spreading Michael's meticulously organized documentation across her conference table. Photographs, witness statements, HOA correspondence, and timeline analyses created a mosaic of evidence that told a story far more complex than a simple parking dispute. Michael had approached his legal preparation with the same analytical precision he applied to software engineering. Each piece of evidence was digitally tagged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. He had created a comprehensive digital portfolio that would make most professional investigators envious. Elena's initial assessment was brutal and direct. "Rebecca Hartwell has made a critical mistake," she explained, reviewing the security camera footage for the third time. "Her attempt to fabricate a narrative about your parking is going to backfire spectacularly." The legal strategy would be multifaceted. They would not just pursue damages for the car repair but would file additional claims for intentional misrepresentation of facts, potential defamation through HOA communications, harassment and abuse of HOA board position, emotional distress caused by the prolonged dispute. Michael had quietly gathered additional evidence that went beyond the car incident. He discovered a pattern of similar behavior by Rebecca, multiple instances where she had used her HOA position to intimidate or manipulate other residents. Former board members who had fallen out with her were willing to provide testimony, each story revealing a consistent pattern of power abuse. The financial analysis was equally compelling. Michael documented the exact costs associated with the incident. Car repair estimates, $3,487. Potential diminished vehicle value, $1,200. Time spent dealing with the incident, 47 hours, calculated at his professional hourly rate. Additional stress-related costs, $5,000. Elena brought in a forensic automotive expert who could testify about the precise positioning of vehicles in the complex parking area. The expert's preliminary report was damning. It mathematically proved that Michael's car was perfectly positioned and that Rebecca's narrative was physically impossible. "We're not just fighting a car accident claim," Elena explained during one strategy session. "We're exposing a systemic issue of power abuse within the community governance." They decided to pursue not just a civil lawsuit, but to file a formal complaint with the local housing authority about Rebecca's conduct. The complaint would include comprehensive documentation of her pattern of behavior, potentially threatening her real estate license and her position on the HOA board. Michael's preparation went beyond legal documentation. He began reaching out to other residents who had similar experiences, creating a network of potential additional witnesses. What had started as a personal dispute was transforming into a community-wide reckoning. The most potent weapon in their arsenal was simplicity and truth. Every piece of evidence was straightforward, every claim supported by multiple forms of documentation. Rebecca's complex web of lies would be systematically dismantled by cold, hard facts. As the legal preparation progressed, Michael realized this was about more than just his car or a single incident. It was about standing up to a culture of intimidation, about holding those in power accountable for their actions. The lawsuit was ready, and Michael was prepared for whatever came next. The Superior County Courthouse buzzed with an unusual energy on the morning of the trial. Michael Thompson sat beside Elena Rodriguez, his attorney, their combined sense of calm a stark contrast to Rebecca Hartwell's increasingly agitated demeanor. The courtroom was packed, not just with the usual legal spectators, but with numerous Oak Ridge Estates residents who had come to witness the proceedings. Judge Margaret Harrison was known for her no-nonsense approach and razor-sharp ability to cut through legal posturing. As she entered the courtroom, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Rebecca's longtime legal counsel, a silver-haired attorney named Robert Greenstein, looked distinctly uncomfortable. He had built his reputation on intimidation and procedural maneuvering, but Michael's meticulously prepared case left little room for such tactics. The presentation of evidence was methodical. Elena Rodriguez walked the court through a comprehensive timeline, beginning with the precise moment of the incident. Security camera footage was projected onto a large screen, each frame analyzed with scientific precision. The video told a story more compelling than any verbal testimony. Rebecca's SUV making increasingly aggressive maneuvers, Michael's car perfectly positioned within the designated parking lines. Expert witnesses provided damning testimony. The forensic parking analyst explained the mathematical impossibility of Rebecca's claims. A vehicle maintenance expert detailed the extensive damage caused by her reckless parking, estimating repair costs and potential long-term vehicle depreciation. Each expert witness was calm, professional, and devastatingly precise. Rebecca's attempts to counter the evidence quickly unraveled. Under cross-examination, her testimony became increasingly fragmented. Questions about her previous interactions with other HOA residents revealed a pattern of intimidation and power abuse. Witnesses came forward, sharing stories of similar encounters, residents who had been too afraid to speak out before Michael's stand. The most powerful moment came when Michael took the stand. Unlike Rebecca's emotional outbursts, he spoke with calm, factual clarity. He detailed the financial and emotional toll of the incident, the time spent documenting the case, the stress of dealing with the HOA, the impact on his professional life. His testimony was a masterclass in measured composure. Judge Harrison's questioning was particularly incisive. She systematically dismantled Rebecca's narrative, highlighting the inconsistencies in her claims and the overwhelming evidence against her. It became clear that this was more than a simple parking dispute. It was an expose of a toxic power dynamic within the community. The verdict, when it came, was comprehensive. The court ruled entirely in Michael's favor. Full repair costs for the vehicle. Additional damages for emotional distress. A formal reprimand of Rebecca's conduct. Recommendations for review of her position on the HOA board. But the most significant impact was beyond the legal damages. The trial had exposed a culture of intimidation within Oak Ridge Estates. Residents who had long suffered under Rebecca's unofficial reign began to speak out. The HOA board was forced to conduct a full internal review of its practices. As Michael stepped out of the courthouse, the crowd of neighborhood residents erupted in applause. What had begun as a simple car accident had become a landmark moment of community accountability. Rebecca Hartwell stood alone, her once powerful network of influence systematically dismantled by truth and persistence. The pearl-white Escalade, once a symbol of her perceived authority, now seemed just another oversized vehicle, stripped of its mythical power. Michael Thompson had done more than win a legal battle. He had shown that standing up to bullies, documenting the truth, and maintaining one's integrity could create real change.